Welcome to the next tutorial in our Angular component library series. In this tutorial, we're going to be creating a text input component. It's going to be quite similar in many ways to the button component and how we approach that. However, we're going to take advantage of the workspace generators we created previously to easily scaffold out our new library. So let's get started. First thing we want to create our text field library or text input library. And we can do that by using our NX console. We create generate. We have now, if we do search for library, we've got our workspace generator. We can generate our library. And we'll call this text input, I suppose. We're going to probably add things like validation with form fields and stuff like that in future. But for now, we're just going to call this text input and focus right on the input box itself. And this is looking good, so we can hit run, and that will now create those files on our disk. So if we go back to our file folder structure, we can see the text input folder has now been created, along with our storybook, so we can test things out, and our library and our ng module and stuff like that. So if you don't see those options in NX console, go back and check out my last tutorial and you'll be able to see how we created those. So you'll see we have everything we need to get started. I'm just going to get rid of common module because we probably won't need it. So we can get started now by creating our component, our text input component, and adding it to the library. Now we also added a workspace generator for creating components, so we can take advantage of that. So we create text input and we want to add it to the text input project. And here it's going to run a little preview of it in the window and we can see what's going to be created. That all looks good to me. So we can hit run. And again, if we hop back to our folder structure, here we can see we now have a components folder with a text input subdirectory, and we have our stories file created and our component and our ng modules being updated with our inputs and exports. So again, exports required if we want to let other people use this component. We also notice our input TS file is also being updated to include the export of that component. Great. So let's start by running our Storybook. Okay, so we can do that by running npm nx run Storybook, and we want to call this or text input. Oh, got this the wrong way around. npm run. Okay, so this is going to start our Storybook up now. And we can change the title just to text input for now. That's fine. Again, I'm going to create a little template region here so we can actually use our component in here. Great, so let's open that URL and we'll see our primary, but obviously nothing happens just yet. So if we hop back to our code, let's take a look at our component. So I'm going to get rid of all this first of all, just do a little bit of cleanup. Great. So similar to button, input fields come out of the box with a lot of accessibility features and things like that. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to create our own BYT text input component, because what we'd have to do is put an input in here. Right, okay, so there can be multiple types of input, like text or email or things like that. And we would have to create props for all those things and then forward them into our input field. So, we would have to create an input in here. And so like type, and then, okay, if we want to, we could just add string, but equally we might want to be bit more specific and do text or email. you know, etc., etc. That kind of gets a bit annoying. Additionally, we have things like accessibility features. So, for example, at input, area area labeled by, for example, and that's okay. We could add that in like this, and that's all well and good. However, let's take a look at what the actual output of this is. We're getting errors just because we have strict mode on by default, so it's saying these fields haven't been defined, but they're saying they can never be undefined. Okay, so let's just in our template here, then we'll just do byt text input. Okay, so that's fine. That's rebuilding now. And we'll reload this. And here we have our text field. Okay, great. So let's try and use that area labeled by, for example. So area, well, one, people expect to use the same attribute name as they would on a standard input. So you'll see this, we have to use rather than using area labeled by, we have to do it in this sort of lower camel case form. Okay, now we could fix that. The way we can do that is by defining in here area labeled by, and that allows that to work. So I can now do area labeled by. However, this is the key. This is one of the main reasons why we don't want to have to do that. Apart from having to support all the many options that a text input can have in the browser, so we don't have to keep forwarding these on manually. What we do get is a duplicated property. So you'll see here now the byt text input has area labeled by, and our input child also has area labeled by. So that isn't really ideal. So I'm just trying to make this a little bit bigger so you can see. As now we have sort of incorrect area attributes applied on the wrong elements. So that's why it is typically a bad idea to use this approach. Similar to how we use the button, we are going to use an attribute selector. So let's just undo all those changes because we don't want to go down that road. What we do want to do is change this selector to use these brackets. Now again, you're going to notice we're getting these errors here from ESLint. All we need to do is go into our ESLint RC JSON file and change this to accept attribute selectors. And we save that and we can go back now and no complaints. Great. So what we can do now is change this to an input and we can get rid of this. On top of that, this also allows us to use ngModel without having to do any code at all in our component. Normally you have to set up control value accessors and things like that. We don't have to because ngModel works on input controls out of the box, which is very nice. So it simplifies our code a lot. And if we just reload this and now if we inspect it, you'll see there's just one element and we have area labeled by, and that works as expected. So great, let's remove all that, keep it nice and simple. Excellent. So here we have our byt text input. Now we want to add some styles. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Again, we can target the host element by default. And okay, so we've added some default styles here just to make our text input look a little bit better. If we go into our Storybook now, we can see it looks a little bit like this. Great. So first thing you'll notice is we're getting this ugly blue, dark blue line whenever we focus. So let's work on changing that. And we do that by using the focus pseudo selector. I can use the and here because I'm using SCSS. You can, if you're using CSS or anything like that, you can do focus and do your styles in here. But I'm not going to do that. So the property we're looking for is outline, and what we can do is we can set that to none. if we want to remove the default browser styling. What we probably want to do is we can do border color because we do have a border set, so we can let's add some color. Let's just say I'll do a blue, something like that, to give it indication that it's going to be focused. So let's see. Yeah, and there we have a nice focus outline. What we can also do is we can add a box shadow, and if we set it to 0, 0, which is 0 on the x-axis, 0 on the y-axis, and we can do a blur. We can do 2 pixels, try 4 pixels, and then we'll do this. Now this probably won't be exactly what we're after because it's too strong, but you can kind of see the effect of what we're doing. Now, an easy way to fix that, I suppose, we can change the opacity as well. So we can bring this right the way down, and you'll notice this is doing a long hex code. You can also change this easily by toggling here to get a bit more precise RGBA values. So there you can see we have kind of a nicer outline there. Now, what we also want to support is a placeholder. So in our story files, let's add a placeholder attribute again, because we are not forwarding on these values to some input in our component. We don't have to add any inputs for this. We can just say enter your name. Okay, and we'll see if we reload this, we get this. Now we also probably want to change the color of the placeholder, and we can do that by adding the styles. We can use the placeholder pseudo selector, and all we do is set color. And let's try this. It's probably a bit light, but not too bad. We can make it a little bit darker. We'll drop it down. Let's try that. That doesn't look too bad. So you can now see the placeholder, which will disappear as soon as I type anything in the box. Great. Excellent. Next of all, we want to support invalid states. Now, we'll probably come back to handling error messages beneath it, saying is a required field and stuff like that. We'll come back to that. But for now, what we do want to support is a red border on the outline. And let's look at how we can do that. So Angular has 2 ways that we can create forms or bind to form values. There's template-driven forms, which is the ng model that you've probably seen, and there's reactive forms, which use form groups and stuff like that there and can apply validation rules and stuff like that. Luckily, they both kind of work the same under the hood, which means we can very easily handle accessing the invalid state. So there's a few ways we can do this. I'm going to show you both of them. But first of all, let's just do ng model. Okay, and we're going to bind this to value. Now what we can do in here is we can set a default value here. And now to use ng model, we need to import forms module. Okay, great. And then we reload this. There we go. You can see John Smith has been populated by default, which is great. Now, what we do need is we want to be able to get to an invalid state. So let's do min length equals 3. Should be that. So if I am to inspect this and change the value to a number less than 3, you will see, or length of less than 3, you'll see we get this ng invalid class. And that gets applied regardless of whether you're using ng model or reactive forms. So the easy approach is to add styling whenever that class is applied. Now you may notice if I remove everything, it becomes valid again. And you're wondering, okay, min length is less than 3, how is this valid? It's because if it's not marked as a required field. So empty is a valid state. So I would need to make this field required to show that up. But anyway, so that is one approach. So we could do in here ng sorry, it's not a pseudo selector, ng invalid, and change these properties to, let's make it a red, and let's just shift the hue so we can, so you can see here, this is a good way of changing colors and matching the same saturation and lightness as you can use the HSL thing. I'm going to change that to something like 20. Great. Okay. Maybe that's a bit orange actually. So maybe change it to there. Let's try that. And well, I'll just convert this to RGB just to get that code. I'll paste that in there. Great. And we can switch that back if we want it. Great. So let's see how this looks. So if I make this, you can now see our field goes red. So that is one way of handling invalid. What you can do is you can handle this programmatically. So you may want to know in code if your field is invalid, and it's not too difficult. What we can do is we can do constructor private. Okay, so let's get read only ng control. Okay, so let's just stick a debugger in here and see what we have. Great. So you can see if we inject ng control, we get the instance of our form binding, our value, and we can see the property on here if we scroll down for invalid, which is exactly what we need. So what we want to do is we want to create a getter, and we can do invalid, and we can return a boolean, and we can do return this dot ng control dot invalid. Now this may be null, so we want to do nullish coalescing. We can do that. So by default it will be valid. And then what we can do is we can do a host binding, and we can just say byt invalid or something like that. They're our own class. Sorry, that should be class.byt. So that means this will apply this class if it's invalid. Now, let's just change that to byt invalid, and we can see that this should work as expected. Yep, it does. You can see if we look here, we're getting the class name byt invalid. And one thing we do need to take care of is let's remove ng model. So if we save that and we now do this and look at our console, we're getting some errors here. Saying no provider for ng control, and that's because we are not using ng model, but we are saying we want to get the properties of ng model. However, what we can do to work around this is simply go to our text input class and mark this as optional. Okay, and good practice to say this might not be defined. And that means it'll not throw an error if this provider doesn't exist. And that is fine. So all we have to do is that, which is great. Now, if we reload this, we don't get any errors. You can start typing, great. And then if we update our example again to have those properties in, make sure our let's just reload, great, and then make sure our validation works. It does. So that is how to create a text field component, again taking advantage of all the built-in browser input features and showing invalid states and stuff like that. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video, and check out our next tutorial.